This is Block 10, the 60s, Part 6, Changing Roles for Women, with the section, The Pill. We've talked about the pill before, so we're going to make this kind of short and sweet. Birth control pills, become widely available in the early 1960s, and now, women can control when pregnancy could occur. And then, because women could control when pregnancy would occur, women could plan their lives outside of marriage and children more easily. That, you could, even if you were married, you could plan, a family a lot more easily than you could before the birth control pill. And in that sense, it's an unabated good thing. But, it had its downsides also, that, relationships now are more transient. That what the pill does is it decouples sex from getting pregnant. And now it's really, really easy to have sex and not get pregnant, and that changes the relationship between men and women in a fundamental way. Now, we can all hook up with one another without much in the way of fear of accidentally getting pregnant. And, with the advent of the pill, that sexual revolution, was in full swing. That, it was not cool anymore to kind of be sexually conservative and sexually repressed, as critics said. That you should be out there and experimenting and having sex with lots of people, and, doing all those things because sex was fun, and sex was not dangerous. It got dangerous again when AIDS came in the 80s, but in the 60s and 70s, sex was fun. And, now that, you could go and have sex and not necessarily worry about, the person getting pregnant, the sexual revolution was in full swing, very largely due to the birth control pill. This is Block 10, the 60s, Section 3, Social Upheaval, with the section, The Sexual Revolution. The relationship between the sexes completely changed during the 1960s and 1970s as well. And it began really, for non-radicals, it began with the invention of the pill, the birth control pill. Women now could medically control when they got pregnant, which is a massive social change. The number of children that women were having dropped. Abortion laws liberalized, making the termination of unwanted pregnancies more common. Another huge thing that changed was divorce laws liberalized. You could just, like today, you get divorced for pretty much no reason at all. Just, both people, or one, not even both, one person, one partner in the marriage wants a divorce, and voila, you can get a divorce. You see the posters, divorce, $300, all over the place. But divorce laws used to be a lot stricter. But those divorce laws were liberalized in the 1960s. Married couples could divorce for no cause. Women were, the cultural message aimed at women, as we're going to see, the cultural message aimed at women changed. That women were no longer simply expected to get married and raise a family, that women were now being encouraged that they didn't need a man, that they could work on their own, that they could have it all, that... And because of these things, marriage as a long-term partnership designed for the raising of children, which is kind of the traditional view of marriage. Like, what is marriage? Traditionally, it's a long-term partnership designed for the raising of children. And for all of these reasons, another huge reason, which we have talked about, is the husband as a provider was under assault, that the state now was providing more and more. Marriages that, might have stayed together for economic reasons, were no longer being kept together. Especially people dependent on welfare could get more welfare if they were not married, so people weren't getting married. That the whole institution came under fire. And people who kind of stuck to a traditional view of it kind of were looked at like the subject of this cartoon. Here's during the sexual revolution, Bradley hid out in Canada, which is kind of a play on draft dodgers going to Canada to avoid the draft. And there's poor old Bradley in his kind of old-fashioned suit and hat and tie, completely missed, the sexual revolution. That the women became much more forthright. Women became much more open to having sex before marriage because they could use the birth control pill. They could get an abortion. And the relationship between the sexes changed, that courting changed, marriage changed, how men and women saw each other changed, dating changed. It was one of those things, that you can't put a beginning date on it, but, the relationship between the sexes today in high school and college is infinitely different in a lot of ways than it was, before the sexual revolution started. That was for middle modern Americans. For the radicals themselves, marriage was one of those institutions that had to be smashed in order to revolutionize the system itself. And that the more you could do to smash marriage as an idea, and as an ideal for many American radicals, the better. That, among, SDS and hippies and all the other people who were actively rejecting traditional American, or Western even, rejecting traditional Western views on sex, marriage, and gender, were having just these enormous orgies filled with drugs and music and anonymous sex. Happened all the time, and in many, many places. It's hard to discount how much the sexual revolution changed the United States and our society. This is Block 10, the 60s, Part 6, Changing Roles for Women, number with the section New Wave Feminism. Sometimes referred to as Second Wave Feminism, led by Gloria Steinem, who we see over here in the picture. We remember Miss Steinem from the 1950s, from Block 8, in which, she was arguing that conformist idea that American women ought to stay at home and take care of their husbands and children and be good homemakers and good housewives was constricting to millions and millions of Americans and to American women. And she started arguing that, women do not need men for a complete life, a fulfilling life. And her famous line was, "Women need men like a fish needs a bicycle," which of course means not at all, because fish don't need bicycles. But for most women, what this meant, that culturally, that the cultural message started to shift, and the cultural message was no longer that there was something wrong with you if you wanted to work, that that women ought to want to stay home and raise children and provide for the husbands. That the message started to shift, in that there was something wrong with you if you didn't want to go out into the workplace, and that women's lives were just the same, as men's lives, and that, just as men wanted successful careers, women obviously wanted the same things. That New Wave Feminism, beyond, Gloria Steinem, started arguing that there were, in fact, no differences. And this is where, the radicalism starts to come in. All of these groups that we see in the 1960s developed their radical followers, started to argue that there was no difference at all between men and women, that gender was what they called a social construct, that there was not behavior that was explicitly female behavior, and there was not behavior that was explicitly male behavior. Obviously that there are biological differences between the sexes, but behavior differences and cultural differences were simply created by culture. And if you change the culture, you could change the differences. And that was and is and remains a very popular idea, that, boys and girls are all just the same, and if we raise them the same, they would turn out the same. But that was, the legacy of Gloria Steinem, that, it became that culturally, what was acceptable and normal and what was desirable completely switched around. And that, the importance of that cannot be overstated. And, I don't think I am wrong in saying that most of you young ladies, watching this video right now, have hopes, dreams, desires, ambitions beyond marrying somebody and raising children. That marrying somebody and raising children might be a significant part of what you imagine your future life to be, but nowadays it's most women harbor career dreams and dreams in the productive field of work just as much as men do, and that is the legacy of Gloria Steinem. This is Block 10, the 1960s, Part 6, Changing Roles for Women, with the section Roe V Wade. no discussion of the modern American political reality or the American feminist movement or women's movement would be complete without a discussion of the Supreme Court case Roe v. Wade. It is by far the most controversial Supreme Court decision of the post-war era. It was decided in 1973 under Warren Burger's court, and it overturned 50 states, all 50 states' laws on abortion, and replaced them with a constitutional right to have an abortion in the first trimester of pregnancy. The legal reasoning that the justices used was the same right to privacy that was used in the Griswold case. That, you know, if a woman had a right to privacy concerning contraception, then a woman also had a right to privacy choosing when she could terminate a pregnancy. In effect, you know, the first trimester rule could never apply because there's no reason legally to say that, you know, Tuesday you can have an abortion because it's the first trimester, but Wednesday you can't have an abortion because it's magically the second trimester. So what in effect has been created was a constitutional protection for the right to have an abortion at all times during a pregnancy, right up to the point at which the baby is ready to be born. The decision of Roe v. Wade launched a culture war of such intense power that it had not that the culture wars had not been seen on this level since the arguments over slavery in the 1850s. And I really believe that it is such a powerful issue because each side calls into its defense one of the most important strands in who we are as Americans. Pro-choice advocates, women who support the right for a person to have an abortion, argue that a woman is an individual with unique and total control over her body and over her own decisions. And thus, a decision of whether to abort a fetus or not can only be hers and hers alone. And the reason that's such a powerful argument is because as Americans we value our individualism. That the individualism is the most important thing in the world, that you yourself are not a means to an end. You yourself are your own living, breathing creature before God, if you will, and the rights of the individual must always be respected, even if they are unpopular. So, you know, the pro-choice argument goes to an argument towards the primacy of the individual. Very powerful strand in American history and culture. Pro-life advocates, those who reject a woman's right to have an abortion, argue that all of the semantics and all of the arguments aside hide the fact, a very simple fact, and that very simple fact is that you are killing a baby, and no other rights can interfere with an individual's right to life. This argument goes to the very powerful strand of Christianity at the heart of the American experience. That, you know, it was Christianity that, you know, that battled slavery and won. It was Christianity that created all of those reform movements. That, you know, the spirit of Christianity is an incredibly powerful spirit in American culture and history. And people in the pro-life camp see themselves very explicitly as the same people who fought against the moral evil of slavery. And as much as the abolitionists were mocked in their day and they were considered extremists, you know, 150 years later we look at the abolitionists and say, how come everybody wasn't one? That it makes no sense to defend slavery or even to kind of let slavery just exist and not worry about it. That pro-life advocates say that the moral evil of murdering unborn children is worse, they argue, than the moral evil of slavery, and they are convinced that history will vindicate them. They're both great arguments, and the fact that they are both great arguments, and the fact that they both go to fundamentally who we are, but in opposite directions, makes abortion, you know, it was and remains at the heart of the division between Americans of both beliefs. Liberals and progressives tend to be pro-choice, conservatives tend to be pro-life, and you know, it's one of those things that there's very little. If you believe that abortion is murder, there's very little middle ground there. It's like, is there a middle ground on slavery? You know, a person is either a slave or he's not a slave. You can either murder a baby or you can't murder a baby. And on the other side, you're the advocates of of choice, they argue that it's not a baby yet, and you're trying to impose your religious views on me. Who the heck do you think you are for the imposition of your religious views? You know, that every individual has a right to their own conscience and to their own actions. So it's an incredibly divisive thing because there's so little middle ground in between the two sides. And abortion helped launch, the so-called culture wars, which are going to help the conservative resurgence that we're going to see in Block 11. This is Block 10, the 1960s, Part 6, Changing Roles for Women, with the section starting women in the workforce. Careers for women really took off in the 1970s. When we think today of, doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs, everyone, very few of us can imagine those worlds without women in them. And that's for a lot of reasons. Women were joining the workforce in greater numbers. Affirmative action for women guaranteed that they were hired and promoted at rates equal to those of men. That's the legal things, but social expectations change too. Now, as more and more women, got into the corporate world, and not just, not the work that women did in the 1920s and 30s, secretarial work or teaching work, but now women, were becoming, doctors and lawyers and engineers and corporate managers and corporate CEOs, very, very often. And just the presence of women made it more acceptable to have women in the workforce. It became a normal thing. They were more readily accepted in corporate America. Corporate America is out to make money. And if women make them money, they're going to become, valued and successful parts of the workforce. New rules and new social expectations about sexual harassment, meant that women could work, in an office without being treated as a sex object. Imagine being the first woman to work in, some accounting firm, and you're an attractive woman, and you have these 55, accountants leering at you all the time. It's not a particularly pleasant place to go to work in the morning. But as more and more women joined the workforce and, rules about sexual harassment changed, it became a lot easier for women to join the workforce and be productive citizens in the world of work. By the time of the new millennium, by the time of your lives, guys, women were represented in all levels of the workforce in all fields. Really the only thing that a woman hasn't quite risen to yet is the presidency, and that will happen in all of our lifetimes, I'm sure. For a long time, though, women ran up against what was known as the glass ceiling. Women were getting lots of good jobs in corporate America, but they were not necessarily getting the tippy-toppest jobs in corporate America. That they were bumping up against what critics called a glass ceiling. And the reasons for that so-called glass ceilings, were lots. Some people said it was just pure sexism. That women were not wanted at the very top. People didn't think women could do the job at the very, very top, and thus they didn't get it. More nuanced views, said that most women, and this still remains true today, most women take some time off from their career to raise children, and therefore they don't have quite as much experience as men do when they reach the very tops of their profession. People said that, networking, at the very top in the old boys' clubs, gave men an advantage. Other people said that just the differences between men and women. Men are more aggressively driven, women are less aggressively driven, lead men to more easily achieve those jobs. But regardless, the glass ceiling, was a serious issue in the 70s and 80s. But by the 1990s and 2000s, it was not so much of an issue anymore, that female CEOs and female senators and female heads of companies were all over the United States of America. And it really is true that, women, ladies, you can be anything you want to be in the United States of America in the world of work, and nothing is really going to stop you. This is Block 10, the 1960s, Part 6, Changing Roles for Women, with the section the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA. A major feminist issue in the 1960s and 1970s was an attempt to pass a constitutional amendment guaranteeing equal rights based on gender. It was a simply worded amendment. It said that, the laws of the United States shall not be construed to treat anybody differently due to their gender. it was thought that this law would pass incredibly easily. Presidents Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter were all behind it. Republicans were behind it. Democrats were behind it. The amendment passed both houses of Congress with far beyond the required two-thirds majority. It went to the states for approval. If you know what the amendment process is, 3/4 of the state legislatures have to approve an amendment. And the Equal Rights Amendment it seemed that it was well on its way towards easy ratification, and it would have been the 27th Amendment to the Constitution. However, around 1976, in stepped this woman down here at the bottom right. Her name was Phyllis Schlafly. Phyllis Schlafly. And Phyllis Schlafly kind of started a one-woman organization. It was a one-woman crusade against the ERA. And Ms. Schlafly argued that the ERA, hey, it sounds good in a soundbite, and off the bat it seems like a pretty good idea, but it's going to have really negative consequences, she argued. It's going to mean that women are going to be required to sign up for the draft for selective service, that if you can't discriminate men and women, then women have to sign up for the draft just as much as men. She said that the ERA would prevent women from collecting alimony from divorced husbands, that women would not get that men and women in divorce proceedings, children would not be usually placed with the mother, that it would be like a total free-for-all up in the air. She said that, that you could no longer require men and women's bathrooms if the ERA passed. And she kind of fought this lonely crusade, and it started to gain more and more momentum that, wait a minute, maybe these things are true. Do the women of America want to be signing up for a draft? Do the women of America want to sign up not to be supported by husbands after they are divorced? Because why should the husband support a wife? Why shouldn't the wife support the divorced ex-husband? That if we're going to have this Equal Rights Amendment, then you can't make that argument necessarily. In the 1970s, Phyllis Schlafly caught an increasingly conservative mood that, after, many years of progressivism, Johnson, and then, the American people were growing more conservative in the late 1970s. And 4 states short of ratification, the ERA stalled. Time ran out. ERA supporters, and there were millions of them, ERA supporters, got an extension, but several states started rescinding their ratification of ERA. The time ran out again, and the amendment died. Whether you supported the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, or not, you have to give credit to Ms. Schlafly for kind of proving again that one person can make a difference, whether it's a difference you like or a difference you don't like. Ms. Schlafly kind of personally led the charge to stop what she saw as a disaster for American women. And she earned the enmity and the hatred of feminists across the United States and across the world for leading her charge against the ERA.